This is Mindustry Hex PvP. I am Laura Fedicus. I have been recording matches between the top-ranked players of Erekir Eviction, and this is the highlight reel. First game here, Drexium versus Sire versus YS. Sire and Drexium have spawned one tile away from each other, so that forces them into a fist fight very early on. While YS has spawned 8 hexes away on an opposite corner of the map. Of Sire and Drex, one of them has to win as quickly as possible and then claim the other onto their team, get 2 players on their team, and then use the power of 2 players versus 1 to try and catch up. YS, on the other hand, needs to take advantage of the amount of time for either of them to get over to the other side of the map and boom economy and production as quickly as possible so that when they finally do come in contact, he's got the war machine to handle it. All the starting action is going to be the fist fight though. So Drexium is a bit slow putting down the first tank. Usually what you want to do is build a tank fabricator immediately and then manually load it so that you are getting your second hex starting as soon as possible. Drexium hasn't done that, Sire has. Second thing that you want to go for in a fist fight is you want your tank upgraded to a locust factory as soon as possible, since that is the most efficient way to get combat capability quickly. And once you do start getting that locust factory, 4 minutes, 5 minutes in, each of the locusts it produces is precious. 1 or 2 locust advantage when there's only 4 or 5 total is massive. And that makes it a lot easier to push in, to kill off a factory, kill off a power plant, do something that puts a permanent disadvantage, crippling the other player, and then you can get that quick win that you need and get that player on your team. We take a look at the first tanks coming out. Drexium is moving his first tank. Although he's getting the locust down, he is taking the in-between hex. There is some strategy in thinking about where to go at this point in the game. As you see, Sire did the opposite. Sire took a hex away from Drexium. And the advantage that gives you is that Sire has more space to build economy, unit factories, whatever, that is further away from Drexium and thus safer. Drexium isn't going to have as much expansion options as 4th through 8th turbine power plant aren't going to be as safe, that sort of thing. They're both working on their locusts. Another thing about these fistfight locust strategies, the only thing that you have to produce tungsten for the locust factory is an impact drill. And that drill, much of its output is going to go to the locust factory. And so you're not going to have much tungsten left over for economic projects. Building oxide, building electrolysis, advancing your tech. And that's why, unless you have a fist fight, you don't want to build that early locust because it slows down your progress further in the tech tree. So this is the error on Drexium's part. Drexium used his first locust to take that hex there. That exposed the locust to the core explosion, and you're basically rolling a die to see if it survives or not. He lost, and Sire has 2 locusts saved up to fight against 1, which is already a pretty overwhelming advantage. Those can move in, they can overpower a single tank, they can knock out the locust factory that Drexium has. Checking on YS. YS has also made an early locust factory, although not quite as early as the fist fighters on the other side of the map. He goes for a different economic strategy where he goes for 3 impact drills to start out with and get tungsten. And that is in contrast to Another common economic path where players try to get to a couple oxide fabricators and a couple large plasma bores on tungsten as quickly as possible, since the large plasma bores are significantly more efficient. And a bonus with those is you make a little bit of nitrogen, and now you're getting 2.5 times as much for the sort of the same construction. So it scales much larger, much faster than the impacts, which have low productivity and nothing can be done to increase it. Sire has increased his unit production to add 3 stealth factories. The main purpose of those is cheap and easy fodder for taking more hexes. You don't want to commit your expensive and harder to produce locuses to that same thing, as when he does come in contact with YS on the other side of the map, if he's using locuses to take space, his army will not be as large when he finally gets there. Special guest appearance by illustrious teammate Mr. Poo Poo Eater. Unfortunately, I had to speak up in chat to remind Sire that recruiting Drexium onto his team was something that he really wanted to do for this game. As we're moving forward, the big thing we want to watch is the relative number and types of unit factories that these players are producing. As time goes on, you're gathering more and more advantage if you have more factories than your opponent. So I'm going to take special care to keep track of how many unit factories each player has out, and it's a very good proxy for sort of the relative combat advantage of each one. YS has added 3 locust factories in a schematic, and combined with the one he already has, that is going to be significantly more combat production than Sire's 3 Stells and 1 locust factory at this point in the game. Sire's 3rd unit factory is a single locust factory, but know that it's also got much more silicon production in it than it needs. So this is intended as additionally a silicon source. Both Sire and YS have taken some time to put up carbide production. Sire has added another unit factory, giving him 2 more locuses for 4 locuses total, plus the 3 Stells. With the addition of that, the army production on both sides is approximately equal. Mr. Poo Poo Eater is adding 2 more locust factories for YS. When those are finished, his production will be up to 6 factories. YS and Sire's team now share a border and are starting to have combat. Because YS's tanks are spread out, that gives Sire a chance to concentrate forces and eliminate isolated pieces. He's also doing a good job being careful to have as little army as possible inside a hex when the core is destroyed to protect its numbers. Here's another concentrated attack against a isolated YS force. He does notice the problem and move in more forces, but the overall delta of this fight ends up being much worse for YS than for Sire. Now a defensive Titan is up for YS. That's protecting a large important power plant, and that's going to make it a lot harder for any number of locusts to push in that direction. But tactically, while this is going on, Sire is sending some forces around this right flank, and YS appears to have paid no attention to defending in that direction. YS is now sending a counterattack. This core is vulnerable, and if he can manage to kill it, it's going to do a lot of damage to that army of Sires in the Hex. That attack just barely fails, as Sire is able to move forces in the way to protect the core. And while that is going on, YS has some forces moving to the left. Sire's flanking expedition is now very close to reaching YS's carbide production hex. And YS has noticed much too late that this is a threat. He's sent down 2 tanks, and he's going to start to try and build some defenses, but it is too late to protect that. Now that the carbide hex has been destroyed by Sire, he's got enough army left, and there is still no defense, that he can move forward to this surge production hex and take it out pretty easily. This has gotten YS's attention to the point that he splits and pulls back a large number of his locuses to head to the backfield and try and recapture that space. Though because Sire has no more significant forces in the area, there's not going to be much for these to do, but, mop up the last 4 tanks and tank back these cores. But the result of that is weakening him on the left. The hex with Mr. Poo-Poo Eater's locust factories gets killed by a few tanks before anyone noticed. And Sire is moving his forces, concentrating on this left side. He has options for going around the 2 titans that are defending the hex with a power plant and thorium production. Right now, what YS has going for him is he still has a large standing army. He's got 4 locust production factories, and he's got a pretty safe power plant. But instead of trying to recover his tactical position, he's spending all of his energy rebuilding this surge hex, and he'll probably rebuild the carbide hex as well. That is not the most important usage of his attention right now. He's got major threatening armies on his left side that need to be pushed back to a more favorable choke point. Or at least paid attention to and responded to somehow. Like, this titan here is defending from a direction that no forces of significant numbers are going to come from Sire. They're all coming around the left side to the north, and there isn't enough defense up there, to the point that Sire can put in some offensive titans without any contest being put against it. YS finally trying to send a superior force against a isolated Sire group. They are getting a good exchange with the smaller forces that they're able to find. But while that is happening, other contingents of Sire's forces are picking off targets that are not paid attention to and not defended at all. YS is losing his spawning Acropolis and doesn't notice. All he's got to do is move those 5 tanks up a little bit to mount any sort of defense. He would have trouble getting rid of the 2 close titans, but they can be ignored as long as they don't have supporting Sire units around them. which they currently don't. YS loses his Acropolis due to not paying attention. Failing to rebuild and hold his spawn hex is the final nail in the coffin that causes YS to concede. So the match goes to Sire, who proceeds to mop up the rest of the battlefield and win the match. On to the second match. This game features 4 of the top 5 players, YS, Sire, Drexium, and Xexzersy. The 2 closest spawn players are YS and Sire in the northeast corner, and all of the other players are about 4 hexes away. So the first conflict will probably be between YS and Sire. Pretty standard openings from all the players. Xex is going for 2 Stels to start off with instead of into a Locust. YS is working on the Locust factory at 3:30. That is pretty good timing, especially anticipating a fist fight with Sire. And YS is again going for a 3 impact drill on tungsten opening instead of going for bores. YS makes the first move with 4 locusts saved up. That is a pretty good advantage over what Sire has, who just recently finished his first locust factory. Both YS and Sire have begun work on a second locust factory. Sire's is a single production variant, and YS is building a 3 factory variant. YS is beginning his attack against Sire with approximately equal forces. The increased production is causing him to end out ahead. And now with the overwhelming number of locusts here, YS can kill Sire's locusts as they come out one by one. And he'll also be pretty easily able to target down any emergency titans that Sire drops. YS's failure to use micro to prevent that titan from being constructed is really gonna slow down his eventual victory here. Sire's emergency titan will force back YS's attack. On the other side of the map, Drexium and Xex have met at a border with a scrap player nearby, taking up some space, and they are accumulating forces across a line from each other. 3 locusts for Xex. YS is continuing to attack, and he is routing around the left flank to try and hit this second economic hex here. Drex is working on a +3 locust production schematic. That will be in addition to a 3 Stel factory that he built earlier. YS is adding a double overt factory. Sire is counterattacking YS positions. This army here is in danger and takes the core explosion. Though tactically and space-wise things seem even, YS is increasing production a lot faster than Sire is. And trading back and forth evenly should result in a eventual big advantage for YS. Xex has added a double avert schematic, so he will start to have faster available forces in his army composition. Sire is attacking around the left flank of YS, but there are definitely enough reserves for YS to be able to turn this back before it can do much damage. Sire is working on a triple locust schematic. He's going to need that production to keep up with YS. Unfortunately, that hex is completely undefended. His army, Sire's army, is out of position, can't protect it. He loses the triple locust factory, and that leads to his surrender. So Sire is out. Now it is YS versus Drex versus Xexzersy. Xex is now working on diverting avert production into some obviate factories. And they have started adding Titans to their static army standoff at their border. Xex is trying to move his army away from the Titans to protect it, but the defensive walls that he put in are slowing down movement. So the accumulation advantage is definitely going to Drexium here. Drex pushes forward a little bit. The splash damage from the Titans takes out the core. Drex now has a very large army advantage. He should be pushing an attack right now as Xex has no standing forces. But he hangs back instead. While this is going on, YS has been checking up some. He's got carbide, he's got a larger oxide, and he is increasing his real estate. Drex has started building a pyrolysis power plant in a bafflingly weak position. Xex is taking his air and working on sniping out some cores. He's going to get away with it. And as retaliation for the core snipe, Drex is attacking. Although he has lost the significant bulk of his army in core explosion back and forth from the snipe. But he still has enough of an advantage that he should be able to push into here. For some reason, Drex pulls back part way. It's not far enough to be useful for defense against YS if he comes. And he still had an open attacking path to the left there. So I don't know what he's doing. YS is now turning avert production into obviate production. YS is sending a Air Force, probably looking for a core snipe. heading straight for the most valuable hex that Drexium has. This is 3 Locust and 3 Stealth production here, along with a bunch of Thorium. That goes down undefended. That'll really hurt Drexium's production. And he sent objects into that defensive hex, which also goes down. So Drexium has been pretty severely gutted and doesn't seem to have even noticed. And now YS is sending more of his land-based forces to a border that he's opened up with Xex. Capturing real estate by YS leads to many isolated units and forces, and Xex is able to send squads to those isolated units to win back some advantage, although he's not close to pushing back to where YS is keeping his main army about 2 hexes to the east. Unfortunately, though this was going to be competitive, Xex has to leave the game early. His father forced him to go move a pavilion like an Amish. That's a shame. That leaves us with just a weakened Drexium and YS rapidly accumulating more army. Drex is spending all of his attention rebuilding stuff he had, which is a time-consuming process, while YS is moving forces to mop up the stuff that is now uncontrolled that had been built by Xex. Drex, lacking any high-speed options, has added some elude factories. It is way too late in the game for that to be a good idea, especially since YS has a tendency to build tungsten walls around all of his cores that have anything worth defending. YS going for the air attack again. Obviates take out this relatively valueless hex and continue on to the rebuilt triple Locust and Stel, which now goes down again easily, and this leads to Drex surrender. It's the last competitive player in this game, except for Xex, which is AFK, so YS goes on to mop up the battlefield and win this match. The next match is a 1v1 Drexium versus YS. Both of them have spawned in the upper portion of the map. There are 3 neutral hexes separating, so not quite a fist fight, but pretty close. The early economy for both players goes pretty much the same. YS takes a little speed hit by underbuilding beryllium in the first few minutes of the game. YS is the first player to put down a Locust factory. And near the same point in time, Drexium is starting work on a 2-factory Locust schematic. 10 minutes into the game, the border between both players is established. The Locust factory setup has been approximately the same for both players. YS is up to 5. Drexium is at 4, working on 6. YS has a stronger choke point to hide behind, but unfortunately it is much closer to his economic axis. Drexium is going to try and push through that choke point anyway. He is carrying wall sections and doing micro to try and break through. YS has bolstered the defense by putting up a random breach. closer factories, YS has a little bit of a reinforcement advantage, and that is potentially what's making the difference here. Drexium notices the loss, but calls the retreat too late. He is down to a very low army relative to YS's, but YS doesn't have a clear path to get to anything of Drex's worth destroying. He would have to drive past several unfriendly cores and go well into out of life support range. Though YS is giving Drex a chance to fall back behind some more walls and try and rebuild forces. While this is going on, YS has put up a 2 avert factory. Drexium has added his own 2 avert factory. Drexium is making a play against YS. He has now stocked up enough locuses that he can counter that forward station defense. Because YS is not concentrating all of his locuses in one point, the slight production advantage he has isn't happening. Sire, like me in this game, has been spectating. He went onto the Fallen team and is doing things. I need to yell at him to make sure that he doesn't actually interfere in a competitive game going on. At some point, Drexium actually finished up that northernmost locust factory, so he is now at plus 6 locuses to YS's plus 5. YS moving in a larger force to try and drive off this cheap attempt at a core capture. Without a retreat of those, then that's just kind of wasted losses. Though that force is not positioned or arranged well defensively, you can see Drex is trying to build a concave here to get more units firing at the same time, and it is working pretty well. And YS doesn't notice, so he's gonna lose a lot of tanks that he doesn't need to. Once Drexium actually finishes off all those units, he's gonna want to move most of his army back out to not be subject to the core explosion. And that's how that plays out. While this has been happening, YS has pushed cores to a flank on the left side. He should be doing a lot more with that, as a wider attack surface would subject him to much better choke points than this one here that he has to work with. And while this is going on, Drexium has started using his averts to do some raiding. He's hit some power plant. There are other targets of opportunity, and this is forcing YS to move a defensive number of locuses to guard the important stuff in his starting hex. But YS choosing to deploy locuses defensively is really gonna diminish his ability to push or distract Drexium. YS has added his carbide factory. Drexium doing another air raid. There are locuses in the area to make this less effective, but unfortunately they're all moving in the same direction, and the things that they move away from stop being defended. YS sends his air to hope and cut off the retreat. Doesn't quite get the angle that it needs though. But now YS has shown enough averts that Drexium is nervous about losing something to a core snipe. blunder from Drexium there, exploding a core while his air forces were in the same hex. And with that weakness, there is less defense available for Drexium to move somewhere quickly. YS flows in to snipe a core, but he picks the least valuable core available. There's just one impact drill there. There's no unit production, there's no power. And then he sticks around to fight a superior force of Drexium averts and loses all of his air. There's not even really any way to build into that captured hex. And while this is going on, YS starts working on a obviate factory, as the averts he has will feed into that. Getting ready to actually make that attack, Drexium puts his air in position to defend if an air raid comes, and starts moving his locuses to protect that core, which will keep the Titan more secure once it gets built. Not a great way to use your averts to fight a disperse, especially when you have a big pile of locuses nearby, and they could definitely get in range of that without being too exposed to the defensive locuses that are behind it. Though these locuses are in range of YS Titan, that is a manual load ammo feed. He doesn't have that hooked up to a drill, so that thing will run out. At the same time, Drexium is actually pretty close to his unit cap, so keeping locuses alive has become a lower priority now that he has such an overwhelming number of them. Although perhaps he should be sending some side players to go take more cores and increase his unit cap. Really needs to go down and hook up the ammo belts to that Titan. Drexium's forward Titan is online. That's going to head straight for all of those defensive locuses. Once they pull back, Drexium's ability to navigate that choke point is going to be a lot easier. And a reminder on server roles. The reason that you don't want to build a Titan too close to the neighboring hex is that Titans that are in range of hitting a core will be destroyed when the core explosion hits. And that's just a bit of balancing difference on the server to stop people from trying to push the entire map by just building Titans and no units. Building versus building is a despised behavior by all players of culture. Now that the Titans have cleared out enough space, Drex is pushing through the narrow choke point, and YS hasn't even noticed because he is off building a pyro power plant and Surge. They're getting a great approach on the Locust army, which now responds. The numbers are just too great though. They're not going to be able to protect that core. The obviates have not come through fast enough. There is not a critical mass. 4 isn't going to do it. Both those armies have mostly completely killed each other, but YS lost 2 Locust factories while doing it, so he's going to have a harder time recovering. YS's obviate air raid has failed, as some defensive locusts were left behind, while the averts used by Drexium have done several successful core snipes, hitting unit factories and power plants. YS's base is now cut in half. His spawn hex is isolated from the power, and Drex has plenty of opportunity to put a minimal number of tanks to retake this core. YS isn't going to have any chance to rebuild there. YS recognizes that this is an unrecoverable position. So, at this point, Drexium has hobbled YS and is set for a inevitable victory. He'll just have to clear the rest of the map. There was some extra bonus fun in this game. Sire had been building down on Fallen, and I went down and joined him, and we just put up a bunch of afflict turrets, and Drexium had to go through the pain of trying to break through those. So that was fun. Do a little hazing on the newly Titanium ranked player. Fourth match. Let's go. This game features YS, Drexium, and Sire competing. The spawn here shows large distance between all the competing players, so there's going to be no fist fights. It's going to be all economy and production and big army. A bit of a setback for Drexium. He's got no beryllium walls in mining range. And YS wandered off for a little bit before I restarted the game for them. So, but he's going to be a minute behind. Whatever. He'll manage. He'll be fine. Yeah, nothing particularly interesting happens in the early game. Everybody puts up a standard economy. Sire is the first player to put up large tungsten bores. Checking on YS, he is once again doing his 3 impacts for tungsten, and he's got his locust factory running. 7.5 minutes in, and this is Sire's locust factory operating. Sire working on the second locust factory with silicon bonus. Now, YS does have to do some fighting against Terran, who is nearby, so he is going for additional locust factories earlier. 2 more locust factories here, giving him 3 total. And he's adding the nitrogen to boost his tungsten bores. Checking in on Drexium, he has added 3 more stealth factories, and he's got 2 averts built. And that is with the included mass driver, with the plan of hooking those up to an obviate factory in the future. 4 large bores making thorium. YS now up to 5 locust factories, and he's added his thorium drills as well. Working on his carbide at 13.5 minutes. Sire building a triple avert factory. He's got his carbide up as well. And Sire is even putting the finishing touches on his pyrolysis power, which is going to give him a good economic boost. The Drexium avert factory is now operational, and he's working on Claroy, also with built-in mass driver for planning on turning those into Anthicus. Sire has added 3 more avert factories to give him a total of 6. It looks at this point like his game plan is to conserve the locusts and use them defensively, and take the averts for core sniping, cavalry, heavy micromanagement, doing tactical things. So he's not going to play a trench warfare game. He's going to do a lot of raiding with those, take advantage of their speed. And Sire has pushed his border to Drexium, who is unprepared for that. Several of his factories are undefended or poorly defended. He's going to lose his Claroys. Probably also going to lose the Obviate factory. These tanks are not in the right position to defend this, and that's not enough tanks. He needs 3 times as many tanks as Locusts to even stand a chance. Plus, some of those cavalry averts have snuck up behind him, so he's going to lose that very important core for him. And once hitting that core, the averts continue on to a power and stealth producing core. Drexium's going to lose that too. that is definitely going to knock him out of the game. Any further conflict here is going to be Sire mopping up remains of Drexium. He did not consider defense or check his map soon enough and was unprepared for getting attacked at the 17-18 minute mark. With Drexium out, the match is now between Sire and YS. So they've got a north-south corridor between them. YS is heavy on the locusts, concentrated, power, tough to break through, but not mobile. And that is a big contrast to the army Sire's building with fewer locusts, but now up to 9 avert factories producing. Sire is going to be looking for core snipes, and YS is going to have to get his defenses up pretty much on every core he has, because everything is going to be vulnerable to averts diving towards him, regardless of where the border has been pushed to. YS is working on a 3 locust 2 avert factory, and you can see the standard dispersed defense that he tends to put on all of his cores once he can. Here comes an avert dive from Sire, heading over some void space, easily passing around locusts, avoiding them, and there is nothing in the backfield to defend. They're going to focus down this core. YS is going to lose his big pyrolysis power and 2 locust factories. That's going to hurt a lot. And Sire's still got averts left to keep going. This core here is also critical loss. 2 more locust factories and another power plant. This forces YS to pull back the majority of his tanks, and as they move back, Sire's tank force can move forward. Looks like YS just barely saved that furthermost core that got attacked, and he is now working on rebuilding his pyrolysis and locust factory hex. It's easy to retake those, but it's expensive and it takes time. And while that time is passing, Sire's 9 avert factories are gonna keep pumping out the pain. The defenses for this core did not go back up in time, and with those locusts wandering away, this is a pretty easy snipe for Sire to pull off. All that rebuilding wasted. Still very easy for YS to retake those hexes with his sustained locust advantage, but they're still very expensive to rebuild, and it costs tanks to retake them. Sire's next snipe target was the carbide producing hex of YS. Sire's tanks are now on the move, 2 hexes away from YS's concentrated forces. He is able to hit a undefended from ground hex that includes 5 unit factories, nitrogen production, a bunch of stuff there. That is another valuable hex. He is focusing on some of the support content in there and the factory itself instead of trying to take the core. That's going to force YS to spend time moving his tanks, and while that happens, more air snipes can come through. Snipes another hex. Does some core explosion minus on YS's locust population. The Sire tank attack on the right has broken down the core and that entire production factory. Things are looking extremely grim for YS. He sees it too. YS calls the surrender at 28 minutes. There is one other player of sizable holdings on the map, spawned to the south of Drexium. He managed to store up some locusts and some averts, but when faced with a concentrated attack and Sire using that cavalry, he can't put up much resistance at all. And with that done, it's just mopping up the rest of the map. Sire takes the victory, beating Drexium and YS. Final match of the showcase. This is YS versus Sire. They've spawned on opposite corners of the map, so they're both going to have a lot of time before they have to start fighting. This game also has Terran in it, who has spawned 2 hexes away from Sire, so he's got the potential to play a spoiler if he can manage. That's going to have to end up being the first conflict of the game. Sire, we'll see how far he has to get set back to deal with Terran. YS doing his 3 impacts for Tungsten again, and he is the first player with a functioning Locus Factory. In contrast, Sire is going for nitro boosted tungsten bores before doing the Locus Factory. So this is a bit more greedy of an economy here. And once that nitro is flowing, then Sire puts up his Locus Factory. Sire is preparing for the fight against Terran, whose next build is a second Locus Factory along with excess silicon. Sire has added nitro boosted thorium bores, and he is positioning his locuses for the fight with Terran. Terran is up to 4 stealth factories, and that is his plan for defending against Sire. On the other corner of the map, YS has put down 3 Locus's factory, putting him up to a total of 4. And he's starting to go up into power and thorium. A scrap player near YS has made 1 tank and is using it to attack one of YS's cores. I do speak up in chat to make sure that he doesn't embarrass himself and ruin the game. Terran has now added his own Locus Factory, putting up to 1 Locus and 4 Stealths. He's done a little bit of wall building in preparation for defense, but the 4 stealth factories are not going to keep up well with 2 Locus factories and 3 stealth factories. Here comes the attack from Sire. That is a overwhelming force against the defenders. That wall isn't going to make any difference. To fight stealths against locuses, you need at least 3 to 1, and hopefully more. Sire's caution force to prevent losing army to core explosion is defeated, and he's going to have to try again with more. Sire attacking from 2 directions now, while all of Terran's defense was concentrated on the left. That core is down. The Bastion will go down readily, and that'll be pretty much the end of Terran in this game. On the other side of the map, YS has completed an Anthicus factory and is going to start stockpiling those. And it looks like YS is now working on one of his 3 Locus to avert things. Sire has finished 3 more Locuses and 2 averts. And he is starting the expansion phase of the game, which will figure out where the borders end up lying between YS and Sire. YS has finished his own 3 Locus to avert. That's giving him 6 total Locus factories. Sire is moving up the tech tree. He is now starting to build pyrolysis generators. YS has started working on his Carbide and Surge. Sire adding a single Locus factory. That's a strange choice to build this late in the game. I suspect he might actually want the Silicon more than the 6th Locus factory, but who knows. Sire is now building a Quell factory. Quells used to be the strongest and most obvious thing to go for before they were pretty heavily nerfed, and they needed it. It was a good call. Still pretty good and strong siege units, but they are not uncounterable anymore in numbers, although they're still much cheaper than they should be. Sire has put up a couple Claroy factories, the purpose of that being to go into Anthicus production. It's been half an hour, and they've both got big armies, and they haven't touched each other yet, so I have to start egging them on in chat to actually do something. And with that encouragement, Sire and Terran, who are now on the team together, start to actually move out. Large army concentration versus spread out land grabbing YS forces. They'll be able to push the border much closer to YS's homeland. Sire has finished 2 Anthicus worth of production. And then, further back, Sire turns his 2 averts of production into 2 obviates. The concentrated bulk of Sire's force is getting closer to YS, who is pulling back and concentrating his Locust forces, and this is going to end up being the spot where the trenches get built. YS has chosen where he wants his defensive line. He is putting up a schematic with 2 Titans and 3 Lusters. That is pretty heavy firepower defensively, and will not easily be broken unless a lot of force is put to bear on it. If it's also supported by units, that makes it even harder to take. YS has also started adding his defensive disperses in multiple locations. Now we have both concentrated armies looking over the walls at each other, and they are just going to shoot missiles back and forth forever. Sire is taking his Quells and a fraction of force to flank to the south, and YS is using his Avert Armada to try and chase those back into a more protected position. Since the Quells can't fight back against Averts, then that is one of the hard counters available. As long as YS maintains a reasonable sized air force, those Quells need to stay near ground support and can't just go roaming around. Sire is flanking around to the south, and if he can take out that core, then he may be able to keep going. But the constant barrage of rockets from the Anthicus is going to make anything going around that way have to take a lot of fire. And Sire would not be able to hold that southern hex unless he committed his entire force in that direction, which maybe he should have done, but instead he does the conservative thing and pulls back to where he had been. Now in this moment, YS should absolutely take all of these Averts and snipe that core right there and cut down Sire's army. That would be pretty much the end of the game, but he doesn't see the opportunity. Sire makes another play to the south, and that's going to go a lot worse now that there is an Afflict defending it. And so we will all just shoot missiles at each other constantly and throw locusts in the way to be wasted. There's not really any expectation that either side could make enough missiles to actually cut through the defensive fire available here. They should both be looking at ways to go around this mutual blockade. YS is upgrading Averts to Obviates. And YS makes a move to snipe a core that's got some Titan defenses built up in it. He is able to take it out, but the issue here is that the terrain is such that none of his ground forces could move forward to actually hold that. So one obviate will go and just take it back. And we are in the meat grinding phase of the game. Neither player wants to divert forces away from this location because they fear that the other side has enough to break through, so they just constantly shoot missiles back and forth, or attack into an overwhelmingly good defensive position. There's a very narrow doorway that locusts have a hard time getting through. There's a hospital. There are 7 defensive turrets. Don't make that attack. Stop trying. Come on. So after the bout of losing a bunch of recordings through various ways, this was the first one that I was able to take in a long time that I could actually keep. And the joke that came out was the name that I wanted for the video of this game would be Erekir top PvPers can't stop meat grinding each other. Which is true. They can't. They're just throwing units against missiles forever. And they're going to do it for another 40 minutes? Something like that? Go around, come on. Stop attacking the most defensively powerful position. Come on. So this interesting spot here, YS is in danger of losing this core to a Titan building versus building. And that would be really rough for him because that would take out all of those defensive turrets and do a big chunk of damage to his Anthicus blob, which is a big part of the defense. So he needs to do something about that Titan, even if it's just moving units closer so the thing stops shooting at the core. But if that Titan did take out that core, Sire has a lot of ready and in position forces to move forward and hold it. And beyond that core, it is all squishy economy and there is no more hard defense. YS takes obviates, snipes a core. Still unable to hold that particular position because there is no easy land route to it. They're still grinding their meat together. So Sire's next play is to add a double Vanquish factory, which we just got a glimpse of there. And the plan for that would be that Vanquishes have terrible DPS, but they are powerful damage soaks, they're tanks, they're meat shields. So his hope is that if he gets a bunch of Vanquishes, he can drive them into these well-defended hexes, and they will draw fire away from the other units he has that actually do damage. You know, maybe let some more of those missiles land a bit closer to their intended targets. Something to point out is that YS has been building lusters, and lusters are basically the counter to Vanquishes. 3 lusters will focus down a Vanquish in seconds. And they continue to grind their meat. YS is building some phase. That's interesting. And his plan for that phase is phase heated carbide factories. And that large amount of carbide is going to be used to make Scathe. And in this context, the Scathe is going to be a constant barrage of good area of effect fire against whatever land units happen to be within like 3 hexes of where they get put. So that's able to cut off any small numbers of locusts that try to, say, go around the west. Sire has finally remembered that this map has a left side. Unfortunately, he took too long to do it, and now the Scathe is in place, which is going to make any assault from this direction a lot more annoying. He does know that Scathes are stopped by ducks, which is the reason to not build Scathes, is they're just so easily countered if your scathe is in range of enemy territory they can build in. And the only thing necessary to complete that defense would be a build tower that replaces the ducts. Sire can get close enough to do a little bit of damage, although that Afflict is going to fight back. And he does have Locust reserves that he can send. Now Sire is down to 1 Vanquish over here, and 1 Vanquish is not going to accomplish much. And Sire moves in. He is operating under the assumption that Vanquishes soak more damage than they do, and pushing them through a very narrow entry into the entire bulk of YS's army and 8 or 9 defensive towers is bad. This is a huge waste. This is just more meat grinding. He does at least pull back before doing something silly like wasting a bunch of air and Anthicus on the same attack, but you know, there was probably 15 Vanquishes that just got blown up for no reason there. Sire is pulling out of the forward position. He is backing up. He has built up another pile of Vanquishes. He's going somewhere else. Alright, Sire has turned. He's going to the left where the defense is not quite as hardened. And that particular weaker hex, he has at least a spot where some air could move forward and hit some softer economic targets while avoiding Lusters and Anthicus concentrated. But instead of stabbing for the gooey underbits, he wants to hit another defensive hex. And YS has a lot of obviates saved up to respond to this. Yep, defensive units, able to move into position. And Sire has grinded away a bunch of his meat. Shameful retreat. Now, this game isn't all bad decisions by Sire. YS definitely has enough forces and excess forces that he could have been attacking places productively this whole time. He probably could have gone around the left side himself and be all the way back at Sire's base. But instead, he just sort of piles everything up on the front door and gives massive defended targets that Sire can't resist attacking anyway. And even though Sire has built more production and he's got a lot more territory, he is getting salty that none of his attacks are working and the game is going against him. And this meat grinding fiasco has been going on long enough that we are 13 minutes away from the end game. And once the end game hits, everyone is locked to full assault, forced to attack no matter what, and you start getting free units based on how many cores you have. So a player expecting the end game to come should be trying to capture all the easy cores that they can. And YS is starting to send out forces along the edges to do just that. There is a unknown blue player in the upper left corner. That's free real estate. A lot of the more northern constructions of Sire's base are more vulnerable because they don't have a concentrated defense by units nearby. And YS is now starting to use his massive obviate force to go around the edges and hit targets of opportunity. YS's obviates have now worked around some of the right side and are starting to hit economic and production hexes. Sire's blaming Terran for his loss, but I don't think that's fair. Now that he's being eaten around the edge and has no way to stop it, Sire has surrendered and left. So, result of the game, going for 87 minutes, 88 minutes. Victory goes to YS, defeating Sire.